Hi, and welcome back to Hot Off the Press, the show about new releases and the authors that bring them to you. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and this week I get to have a fun one-on-one conversation with an old buddy of mine. Jay, do you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, how are you doing tonight? I'm Jay Requard, and of course, I'm here to torture Jim.
Why is that everybody's sport? I'm so nice and kind and wait, nobody believes that. So
You're sitting here saying that. I'm just like, what is this?
yeah, I know nobody believes it. I'm here for fair sport. So, Jay, you have finally gone from the land of sword sorcery to, dabbling over on the evil side of urban fantasy.
Right. So yeah, I have a new book out. It's called The Driver of Serpents. It's the first book in my novel trilogy, The Blessed and Possessed. It stars a reincarnated St. Patrick of Ireland who's come into the modern world and is a former exorcist for the Vatican who knows that he's a saint and that he's been reincarnated. And he is on a mission in New York to save the last Nephilim, who's at the center of a conspiracy involving heaven, earth, and of course, everyone's favorite character, the devil.
Well, St. Patrick did drive those snakes out of Ireland. Um,
He also punched the devil once right in the mouth, and that's why you have Castle Rock over in Ireland, which is this big fucking rock that they build a castle on top of. Since
I've
I'm the
been
only
there.
one here, folks, tonight, I get to use the F word as much as I want, I think. I don't know. YouTube might ban us. Or they might not. I honestly,
Who knows
does anyone
anymore?
know what YouTube wants to do these days anymore?
No, no clue. So, what inspired you to do this one?
Huh. Well, way back, John Hartness, when he started Falstaff Books, offered me originally a three-book novella deal to write three novellas for his Monster Hunter series. Um, I wrote the first book that turned into a novel that didn't have any monster hunters. That was about exorcisms and demons and angels and shit like that. And he was like, "Well, I guess this is going to have to be its own thing." And now here we are, 6 years later. Um, but yeah, that's essentially what happened. I've always been a big fan of urban fantasy, mostly in television and comic books. I tell people when I'm describing the series that it's Keanu Reeves' Constantine meets Kevin Smith's Dogma. But going back to like the beginning of this, I am really inspired by this comic book series called Crimson, which was about like this vampire kid in New York who's facing off against. Of course, there's a vampire in the mayor's office, and it was Buffy and Angel for me before I was actually into Buffy and Angel. So that's really where kind of all this got started.
So, who's your St. Patrick? Tell me a little bit about your St. Patrick in this one, since he's going to be the hero.
So I Saint Patrick, as we know, is this Romano-British individual who was kidnapped by Irish pirates, taken over to Ireland in around the midpoint of the fifth century, and had revelation out in the fields as he was tending sheep for a local chieftain. At some point, he was freed. He went back to Britain and may have gone all the way to Rome at one point, may have. There's a lot of speculation and a lot of mythology around Patrick, but what we do know is that at one point he returned to Ireland and he began to convert people to Christianity, and there's a lot of legends around that. I treat my Patrick as if the legends were real and they were something that happened in a previous life, and he is reincarnated into a new life where the Catholic Church not only knows that saints reincarnate, but they actually use these saints as exorcists to fight demons in the modern world. So that's really kind of who that Patrick is. I mean, if I were to describe his character, there's a lot of Keanu Reeves, Constantine in there. There's also a lot of, I think, just I like a lot of Irish and Scottish comedians. Like David Naheal is a big comedian I'm a big fan of, and I think Patrick is just kind of like he looks like he's in his 30s, but he's weathered and he's tired and he drinks too much and he smokes too much and he gets into things that priests shouldn't get into. but he always reminds people that I was there before that silly Lateran thing, so none of those rules apply to me. Um, I think his personality really is kind of just. I think if you took the best parts of Kevin Smith's Silent Bob and Keanu Reeves as Constantine, but with an Irish accent, you get that guy.
I'm afraid to ask who his Jay is then. Um,
Actually, his partner in crime is the reincarnated Saint George of England, the Dragon Slayer. So there's plenty of wonderful jokes about Cromwell and how much we hate the English and how much we need to kill the English. Of course, Saint George is there, like, I'm just a psychopath. I was a former knight, reincarnated. I slayed dragons. I'm just here to slay more people. So that's the kind of dynamic that they have going through the book. Like, one guy's like, I'm a drunken Irishman who just doesn't understand why God is making me suffer so. And then you have this knight on the other hand who's like, I'm a knight of God. Let's make everyone suffer. And, it's the Brady Bunch.
so what's the big adventure in the first one?
So the big adventure in the first one is that Patrick quit the Vatican at the very beginning of the book. He quit. He just looked at everyone and he's like, this is corrupt. This is bad. This organization doesn't represent the church I helped found. Blah, 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 blah. I'm leaving. And he goes to all places, New York, because before he left Italy, he was part of this exorcism. And the demon kept telling him, there's a girl in New York that you need to go and find. And she is the word. And the new word resides with her. So he goes to New York, he exorcises another demon, and lo and behold, it's the same demon. Again, because in Catholicism, demons can actually hold on to multiple people at once. But it's the same demon. The demon says, this girl is in New York, you have to find her, she is the word, and the new word is with her. And he goes on this investigation, and he discovers, to his surprise, the very last Nephilim, the joining of a human and an angel together to create kind of a super being, if you would believe it. In Genesis, they label them as the original heroes and giants of the first age. So I kind of play with those kind of biblical themes a little bit in the book, and I take some of these biblical creatures and ideas, and I bring them forth into this kind of action comedy setting. That at the same time tries to ask some pretty serious questions about things like exorcism and who has the right to decide what you do and what your fate's going to be in life. And, really just tries to have some fun at the expense of a mouthy Irishman and his irritant knight who's, of course, trying to kill everything with a sword.
I've been to New York. Nobody would notice.
No, that's a regular day on the J.
So I got to ask this question because I know you well enough for this. What's some of the fun tidbits when you were doing your research that may or may not have made it into this one?
Oh, so I did a lot of research into the Catholic rite of exorcism. I talked to a few active exorcists within the Catholic Church. There's actually a licensing association that they go through and a college that's connected to the Vatican. Um, I actually use Mark Baglio's book, The Rite, which later became an Anthony Hopkins movie, as kind of the starting point for my research. And one of the most interesting tidbits I think that people would never expect about exorcism is how medicalized it is. Um, there was a point in the early 19th century and the early 20th century, I'm sorry, the early 20th century, where the Vatican for a long time kind of held the idea that the devil isn't actually a force in the world, there's really only God, and there's no demons possessing people anymore. Well, they started having all these incidents where all these priests were like, I'm pretty sure this is a possession. Well, there were a few cases. I think people know the case of Emily Rose pretty well, which is based off of a real situation that happened where a priest conducted an exorcism and the girl died in the midst of it. And it later turned out that she had all of these medical issues on top of that. So the Vatican went back and actually medicalized the rite of exorcism. Before you're even able to have access to priests to give you the rites, you have to go through medical examinations, you have to go through psychiatric evaluations, psychological evaluations. You basically have to eliminate everything that can explain why you are afflicted with the symptoms that you are showing, which can be very severe, from anything from kind of Tourette's like syndromes where you're saying things that are out of your control to, I mean, there really are cases where people have spit up nails that they don't remember swallowing, things like that. But the Vatican goes through this really stressful kind of litmus test where they put all of these essentially applicants. You kind of have to apply to get an exorcism. All these applicants have to go through this really medicalized process. And once they're able to evaluate and make sure that there's no scientific or medical reason you're suffering the way you're suffering, then they will give you access to a priest, or if sometimes a priest and a younger priest that goes along with them. I know that's a joke for some people, but that's a real thing too. Um,
Priest or a deacon. And I know a lot of the time they also still will keep medical personnel
yes,
involved in the process.
yes, usually a medical doctor or physician, or some sort of mental health specialist. I know some cases, um, in the modern rite, there has always been some sort of orderly involved, because a lot of these people who are afflicted apparently with possession can physically become very dangerous, not only to themselves but others. Another interesting tidbit that I found that I had to deviate away from in the novel, because being an action comedy, being in urban fantasy, Patrick and George only have minutes to exorcise a demon for someone before we have to get to the next piece of action or the next event or the next characterization. In the real world, Catholic exorcism can go on for weeks, months, sometimes they go on for years. I mean, it really does become, in a way, almost a doctor patient relationship, or a I recently wrote a blog post that people can find at my website, jrequard.com, actually about why I made George and Patrick exorcists. And I've always had a lifelong fascination with shamanism. And one things that shamans have always been purported to do were to exorcise bad or evil spirits from people. And it's an important part of kind of like the communal process of shamanism and being part of a larger group of people that you take care of. Um, I think that in many ways kind of defines a little bit of modern Catholicism and modern exorcist rites, where the priest and the possessed are entering into almost a patient and caregiver relationship that, like I said beforehand, can take weeks to months, even a year, and it's very much a very different process. One thing that I did keep in the novel that I always thought was fascinating about Catholic exorcism is that the end of a Catholic exorcism, or the release of the afflicted from darkness or demons or whatever have you, is preceded by a Marian vision, or a vision of the Virgin Mary, which is supposed to precede, you actually being liberated thanks to God's returned grace. And I found all of that fascinating. And I tried to keep as much of it as I could, because one thing I like about urban fantasy, and I think urban fantasy doesn't get enough respect for it, is that in Sword and Sorcery, we have low magic. We have really low magic systems. In Epic Fantasy, they get a little bit more complicated, a little bit higher. But I think in urban fantasy, a lot of authors put so much research and time and respect into the real world magic systems that they're kind of using and kind of reconfiguring for their narrative. And I really try to keep kind of the sacredness of Catholic exorcism present in the novel, even though, there's jokes flying as much as there are bullets flying.
So, having worked out of Ireland, having spent a lot of time over there, and having been a good little Catholic boy, um, so St. George as well as St. Patrick are both interesting figures with interesting lore. You've got to have found some fun tidbits. Let's start with King George, or King George, St. George.
So, a Syrian knight who, according to legend, followed many of the old dragon myths of coming upon a kingdom where a dragon was oppressing the people, and the king had given up his daughter as a way to appease the dragon. And of course, George, being the good and brave knight that he was, rode out and conquered the dragon. And of course, being a good and chaste knight, returned the girl without marrying her or sleeping with her or taking any possessions or prizes away from the king, which of course helps enables his sainthood. There's also and it's funny because as much as I think Catholics listening to this, and I think people in the church listening to this would bristle at the notion of saints being reincarnated. But during the Crusades, there are several instances where people during that time believed that the saints had actually been reincarnated at various points and had actually appeared to take part in human affairs, with St. George being one of them. So there are stories of him appearing to soldiers, appearing to other warriors throughout history, kind of driving them on to victory. The St. George that I try to depict in the book, I always kind of looked at him. For some reason, I always have Patrick Swayze in my head, like he looks like Patrick Swayze, but he's kind of like this kind of quasi Swiss Guard SAS trained assassin who somehow knows all seven versions of the original Bible and can speak them perfectly, but is still suffering from having to live a life where he remembers the first dragon. He remembers killing the dragon and the nightmare of having to fight that dragon. And imagine being a little boy suddenly being born, and the Catholic Church comes and takes you, and they say, "You're St. George. You killed the dragon." And you have to be, as a little boy, just like, "Oh shit, they're right. I did kill that dragon." Like, it creates this kind of very interesting character. And the same thing with Patrick as well. Um, a lot of the details that I took from their various stories and backgrounds really really influenced how the characters react to the modern world, where George is very much dismissive of it in a sense where he's the perfect soldier. He's there to fight the dragon. He thinks the dragon is always there throughout the ages, no matter what form it takes. He's always going to have to be there to do the bloody work of fighting it. Patrick looks at the world, especially in modern times, kind of like how he looked at ancient Ireland. Well, what we would think is ancient Ireland for him would have been very contemporary, but seeing all these people from all these different walks of life and these diverse communities, we now know that like Ireland during his time was a very diverse place with people coming from all around the world to all of these different old Irish kind of like they didn't really have a city structure at the time. They really kind of had like kind of movable towns in a sense where clans would move from one place to the other and there was still love nomadism to in a sense. But he had to work with all of these different people from all of these different faiths and religions. Like, we kind of have this idea of St. Patrick removing all the serpents from Ireland, which is really an allegory for getting rid of paganism, quote unquote. But I think now we know, looking at the obvious integration of pagan symbolism into Irish Catholicism and Scottish Catholicism as it later developed, that, he clearly had to have some ecumenical views to be able to work and live and relate into the ancient Ireland that he walked into in his first life. And he takes a lot of those things that he saw from that first life and brings it into this new world that he's in. Like, one thing that he's very clear to kind of like point out to people is, you know, when it's you all look at 2024 and you all think, "Oh, this is awful." You all have vaccines and toilets and buildings, and you can go down the street and get coffee. My wife died of a cold. People lived in shit. And if they weren't living in shit, they were being hacked down by bandits or warlords or something terrible like that. I think, having reincarnated characters is fun because I get to pull out some of my old Highlander fandom. Because one thing I always loved about Highlander, and you're a Highlander fan too, I know. One thing that I always loved about the writing of Highlander is that Connor McLeod or Duncan McLeod, whichever McLeod you got in that scenario, was always cognizant of like, this is where I had been, this is how I had lived, and this is how different things are now. And how I'm kind of happy with how things are now versus how things were then.
Well, and my biggest problem with Highlander, if you're going to call him McLeod, you damn well better put him in the loud McLeod tartan. That's all I'm going to say.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And they do
Wrong
not.
tartan all the way. No, they didn't. Isn't it pretty yellow? I think
Oh,
like
yeah.
yeah,
It makes you look like a giant honeybee from the music video that I can't.
it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, you could see him coming from 100 miles away.
Imagine Henry Cavill just a fucking honeybee just running down the Highland Hills.
Yeah, because it's yellow and black. The loud McLeod. But anyway, wrong. We're going down the wrong path. So, what else is coming out of this series since this is just the first book?
So, the second book will be out May 15th. That's called The Devil of Purgatory. St. Patrick and the crew will be returning to Ireland, and that's all I will say about that. The third book will hopefully be out sometime in July. That's called The Saints Come Marching, and there the crew will be returning back to New York, and we will have a surprise appearance by the one and only Jesus Christ. Yes, evangelicals, I'm bringing him back. Christ is back, everyone. Praise Lord, hallelujah. It's going to be great on YouTube.
Lightning is going to strike New York.
5, 4, 3.
Just grab the sword behind you. It'll be fine.
My lightning rod.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So while we're at it, you've also got a show that I've had the pleasure to come on and harass you a few times doing Pondering the Orb. Do you know, what's coming up on that this season?
So we're entering the fourth season. I have a show on YouTube called Pondering the Orb, which is about books and music. I usually highlight a classic book within the fantasy genre and a relatively new release in the same genre as well. When it comes to music, I'm a fan of two primary genres, which are melodic death metal, which is a heavy metal genre, and synthwave, which is electronic music genre. Weirdly, those two cultures have over time merged with each other, so there's a lot of cross pollination. So I've been able to make a lot of friends with some bands and some synthwave musicians, and I go out there and I just try to promote these two different forms of music while also promoting books. This year, for a lot of the classic stuff, we're going to be looking at a lot of Tolkien. We're going to be looking at some Le Guin and Moorcock. I'm going to try to introduce Tanith Lee to the audience. And of course, there's a bunch of great new stuff that's happening in short fiction that I can't wait to show people. As far as music's concerned, we have some of the best music out there from synthwave artists today. For a genre that was told to be dead about 10 years ago, it's thriving. I mean, some of the biggest songs right now on Spotify are synthwave songs that are getting millions and millions of streams. It's dominated YouTube in terms of like big playlists, especially in the chill music area. Being part of these communities and being able to bring my piece of what I love to YouTube has not only been a great way to get the word about my work out into the world, but also help spread knowledge about the books my friends are putting out, but also just share great music. I went into the show with the idea that I wasn't doing it to be successful. I was doing it to have a good time, and going into the fourth season, I'm still having a good time. But, so Jim was part of the first season, and the first season was set out to be a failure, like intentionally set out to be a failure. I designed that thing to fail.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming. But one thing that I missed from that first season of the show is that I was able to do these kind of longer form interviews with people. So one thing that Pondering the Orb has allowed me to do is break off now and do smaller shows. So sometime this summer, a new show will be coming out called Small Talk Sucks. And of course, you will be a guest on it, and so will several other people, but it'll be more of an hour and a half long conversation about current events, something that's going on in the zeitgeist at the moment. And hopefully that will be a weekly thing. But right now, Pondering the Orb will return this April, usually in the second and fourth Wednesday of the month, because that's really all the time I have to get that show out.
Well, for me, an hour and a half is short form. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yes. Yes, I do.
you've met me. It happens. I've been known to go shorter.
Yeah. Like,
Two,
anyway.
three,
Yeah.
4 hours. I don't know.
No, but you know what? The beauty of Pondering the Orb is that it's been able to get me to have longer conversations with people like you. It's been able to get me to make connections with people that I wouldn't have been able to make connections with beforehand. And I think the beautiful thing about Small Talk Sucks is that it will allow those kind of longer conversations that need to happen. Because, for example, I want to bring you on and talk about, a lot of the things that are happening in the artificial intelligence space, which we were talking about earlier for another panel with ConTinual, TM. But I think that just having that ability to talk to people in a longer form again is going to be really great. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think there's going to be a lot of great conversations born out of it.
Well, because we've been going now for a while. Because we went for a while just sitting here
Yeah.
catching up because it's been a while. But so where can everybody find you at?
So you can find me at jrequard.com, which is my website. You can also find me on YouTube at jrequard or at Pondering the Orb. You can find me on most social media except X at this point because they basically just sold everything back to X. I don't know how that works. I guess selling your own Honda to you for $2 billion is a thing. Um, the I have to ask you, man, since this is just me here and you, and
Uh-huh.
there's no rules anymore. When you look at things like ConTinual and you look at other things going on in kind of like the book space, especially on places like YouTube, how do you think the health of that is right now?
It's a mixed bag. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'd
it's
agree
like
with that.
anything else. So if anybody wants to get some of the behind the scenes stuff, doing any kind of new media is a mixed bag, right? Because I
Right.
mean, yeah, I do a lot of stuff for Continual. Yeah, I've got a couple of my own other shows. Yeah, I do a lot of other media and shows, talking tech and business and gaming. All the stuff I get drug into is all the different me's, right? You know, what's been really interesting, and we sort of were talking about this pre-game, but when we look at attention spans and how people operate, I mean, with the new series I'm writing, I'm trying to figure out where it's going to fall in terms of length. Now, the story's going to be the length it is, and I know roughly where it's going to wind up. But
Hmm.
if we look at things like book talk on the Toxic
Hmm.
Talk, I have a hate relationship with most social media.
Right.
That's no big secret. But I mean, it's the ability to reach and connect with people. And I see the people I see that are the most successful that tend to have the best impact are the ones that are positive about it, right? It's what do they love?
Right.
It's what do they see? It's what are they having fun with? And there's a lot of creators I follow that are all doing really fun, innovative stuff
Hmm.
that I want to see. There's also then one because again, based on some of the stuff that I do, I've got a number of different profiles where we use them, we look and we monitor and we build profiles that are deep into certain channels, certain kinds of content. And the other place that is extremely popular is the most toxic fandoms that you can find out there
Hmm.
with hateful authors, hateful fans, or just hateful people that are going out and just stirring up all sorts of a
Hmm.
mess. And so the people that curate and cultivate things to have no, this is a fandom, if you're a fan of mine, you're coming to have fun, you're coming to have something insightful, you're coming to do things that are constructive. That's the people that I want to see. But again, especially with the current condition and the way things currently are, there is just so much general overall negativity that you know I, I'm not. I'm sort of on a social media hiatus, beyond just what the bare minimum is I've got to do to get stuff out there. Because if I take a look and start jumping on some of the feeds that I've got, it's just soul sucking.
Oh yeah.
And it becomes self-referential and it's performative and it's a lot of making noise to make noise. And I'm watching people destroy their mental health, their careers, their creativity, all the rest of this. And I'm like, yeah, that's not something I want to be a part of. And I've, been known to go stick my nose in some of those places. And I have at times have made the error of breaking my own rule, which is trying to make a comment somewhere to tell people to calm down, back
Hmm.
off, look at something a different way.
The
There's
creatures of the
no point.
choir on this one. Yeah.
There, and there's just no point.
Well, like, I think that you brought up a really important thing, and I didn't mean to turn this into something else. I know this was hot off the press, but before we go, and
Wait, this is the Jay Requard show, isn't it?
feel free to cut me off, whatever. Um, the I think you bring up a really good point. Like, I think especially for authors now, the real danger about going out on social media is that you really have two choices. You're either there about your books or you're there about your personality. And more, you can't combine the two because there is an inherent danger of combining your product with a political opinion or a personal opinion or just a worldview and people shitting on you for it.
Yeah.
The way I have taken to it and the way I have tried to navigate it, and I feel like I navigate it fairly well depending on the platform. And I think it really does come down to the platform you decide to invest your time in. For example, I think Meta is a place where writers go to die in a certain sense. I think it is one of those places where you kind of yell into the void and people yell back at you, but all that really kind of gets done is yelling. And I think X went the same way too. I think that there's a thriving community on Threads. I think that there's a thriving community on YouTube and TikTok and to a certain extent Blue Sky. But one thing that you brought up that I think is really important, when we had this LibGen thing that happened a few weeks ago, one thing that really disturbed me, and I just did not get into it, is how quickly authors jumped to reveal how many books that they had had stolen from them. And it kind of when it gets to your point about, like, things have become a little too self referential. Like, the point wasn't that you had your personal books stolen. The point was we as a community had been robbed.
Mhm.
And I think that that is something today with today's publishing scene that, like, we miss a lot sometimes. Like, there are things now that are happening in the space, both business wise and entertainment wise, culturally, that we all kind of miss because social media has kind of made us a little too self-referential. And I try very hard, and I see you do that too, and I see others do it as well. But I think when it comes to young authors, one thing that we have to train them on is not to get sucked into their social media presence or their social media presentation being who they are
Their
as the author.
persona, right?
Exactly.
Now, I mean, much like you, I mean, what you see is what you get here, right?
Yeah.
If you find me at an event, you find me at a convention, something like that, yeah, I may be dialed to 12, but um, fundamentally, this is what you're gonna get.
Right.
Generally, somewhat snark. Okay, a lot of snark, a bit of smart ass, and then you want to dive into something deep. I'm probably good for it as long as you're buying the beer, but
Right. Or some very good scotch, may I mention.
or some very good scotch. Yes, and I do have a few people that are willing to indulge that as well. Um, but and since we're kind of going down this path, I think that one of the things that you and I have talked about both on and off, over the years is what's more important. Is it creating is it creating the creative work that has the message you want to get out there and where you
Hmm.
find your fans, where you find your people, and create the stuff that has the impact you want to have? Or do you want to burn a shitload of energy screaming at the void, then have a whole bunch of, people also that go along and scream at the void, and the next thing you know, 3 weeks have gone by and you haven't done anything productive?
Right.
And, I recognize a lot of people would argue on both sides of this mess that, it being screaming on social media is productive. No, it's not. I've been in this field for I've been in multiple fields that all impact this for way too long. And the big problem I see is that people just get into that cycle, destroy their mental health, destroy their brands, destroy their careers, destroy their work. And you and I both know some large name authors that have gone down this path and
Mm-hmm.
destroyed careers in an instant. Um,
Well, yeah. Well, social media is a peephole into a person's personality and all their complexities. And I think we as authors like to have the idea in our heads that our words are so succinct and so concentrated and so powerful that we can put out 3 sentences about how we feel about Gaza or the economy or something happening in Brussels or how our matcha tastes at Starbucks that morning. And somehow that in itself will demonstrate not only our character, but our depth of knowledge and understanding and our wisdom and make people believe that we as authors are these kind of higher thinking beings when the truth is like you're funneling yourself down into a 3 sentences and then you have to bear all the consequences of whatever those 3 sentences were.
and the most effective thing you can post is a picture of your dog.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think like the reason why people want puppies and kitties is because puppies and kitties don't carry a lot of negativity with them. And I think just in general, I think if you can be an author who's authentic with your voice and your worldview, but still, and I struggle with this part, like I will admit that I struggle with this part, but still try to be positive with your readers and present them a positive outlook, not only through your work, but through their interactions with you. Like, I think that's a very powerful thing, but that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of trust. And especially now, one thing that social media has eroded, I think, is authenticity. And finding that authenticity, I think, takes time. And I think too many authors today expect it to be found almost immediately, where it's not going to be found on your social media. It's going to be found in your book. And it's going to take a while for that book to be found. But like, that's really where it matters. All this
And
other stuff is temporary.
well, and the other thing, and I have said this in workshops and conventions and on panels and on interviews and everything else, is when you respond to something in the heat of the moment, you never I mean, because again, I've done enough stuff in media over the years and whatnot. I know how that game is played. When
Mm-hmm.
you respond to something in the heat of the moment, you do not have even a fraction of the details. You have somebody's viewpoint that has been, depending on what your chosen media source is, you've got somebody's level of bias that's coming through, and you're going to jump onto something that is not going to be factually correct because I can tell you, look at the number of stories that go through corrections. One of
Mm-hmm.
the one of the biggest benefits and curses of online news, online media, online journalism is the fact you can see, oh, this was last edited here.
Uh-huh.
Problem is, you don't have it in print to go back and say, well, here's the retraction, here's the correction, here's what it is. But I mean, if you look at the number of times a lead story will be corrected or adjusted on even small stuff in the first 24 hours,
Right.
again, the biggest thing that, and one of the other things I will say is this, when you are, we forget sometimes that when we're talking within the business, within the industry, right, as writers, the conversations we have
Uh, yeah.
are not interesting to anyone else except for the people that maybe are wanting to come into this community or who are just sitting there popping the popcorn to watch the drama.
most readers would not get or care about the majority of things we talk about. I've been convinced for a long, long time.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't get it.
And so going down that path and talking about what the state is of new media today, I think this goes beyond just us and writer community and books and talking about entertainment and media and all this kind of stuff. At this point, to me, it's generally all of this. And the notion of going out and doom scrolling, if I'm contributing something that is putting somebody into a worse mood when they get done doom scrolling, I've failed.
Well, I have to say, I think that this is the age for some of the best books to be written.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is the time for people. I mean, if there are writers who are listening to this eventually, that sit down and think like, I'm going to write a book. There's so much more power and promise and just happiness in sitting down and focusing on writing the best book you can and getting your message out that way instead of spending the 8 hours you should have at your laptop generating words instead generating words on someone else's media platform. And I think that's the other thing that people need to realize too. Like when you're spending time generating minutia for Facebook or Instagram or wherever, you're generating minutia for someone else's bottom line. You could be perfecting your craft, you can be honing your message, and you could be leaving something that is going to last beyond whatever social media post you're going to make that day. Something that might last for years or decades or centuries. But this is the time I really think for authors to like really buckle down and focus on writing the best book they possibly can. And before we started this conversation, folks, Jim and I were talking about like the state of the modern readers. I think the modern reader can actually be rescued to a certain extent in terms of their attention span. They just need to be dealt with authentically for a little bit, and it needs to go outside of just having someone on TikTok telling them this is what you read next.
Mm-hmm.
You need to start connecting books to something deeper than just, oh, this was on TikTok.
Well, and you keep hitting on one word that I've gotten to loathe, which is authenticity.
Yeah.
Because everyone I hear that spouts it out for the most part is anything but. Right?
Oh yeah, it tastes like shit in my mouth too.
Mm-hmm.
But it is something that I think captures the one thing that is lacking today. I don't think that we have a better word for it, but I think internet culture has somewhat taken something from us. A je ne sais quoi, if you will. But I think that you detected too that like, there is something that is missing a little bit that we can get back, but it's not going to be found necessarily sticking around here.
And the other thing that I will say is, because I think you hit on it, but we didn't go deep enough, is that notion of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
People build reputations, people build followings, they build their brand on one of two things.
Mm-hmm.
It is either they generate that negativity, performative bullshit that they're in a cycle and they just stir up hate and they stir up noise and they stir up frustration and they stir up angst and they stir up anxiety and they stir up all of this noise.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what you're creating there, what are you putting into a book that I'm going to get? And who is going to then take something away from that that's going to help improve their life? Now, you and I both know some writers that's what they're putting out the door, and there is a market for that, right?
Yeah,
it's called grimdark. I'm too snarky to write it.
No, I think grimdark came along at a time and was a reaction to a lot of things that were happening in '90s fantasy that were rightfully bullshit. At the same time, I I am on the same wagon as you are when it comes to just how far grimdark has gotten. The cynicism, I think would. I, the cynicism has really gotten out of control to a certain extent where I worry about those readers a little bit sometimes just because I like characters that are dark, but they're starting to be. I try to write character. I'm working on a series right now that I kind of wrote as a response to George R. R. Martin, because I think for a lot of the wonderful things that George R. R. Martin did, and that Mark Lawrence did, and Anthony Ryan, and all of these great grimdark authors,
Here's
I
the
think
question: Are you
one
going to
thing.
actually finish it?
Yes, yes, I will. Ha 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 ha. Thank you. Um, but one thing I think that they did was I thought they brought reality back to fantasy to a certain extent because like this is what human history really is like for a certain extent, but they didn't improve upon one important thing that makes fantasy work. Like Jon Snow's okay, but he's not an improvement on the fantasy hero. He's not the next step. Okay, the world is grimdark. I will accept that premise. Give me a hero that's going to rise above it being grimdark.
Mhm.
Because I think that's what people really want. Because I think that we all want to believe that we can rise above the world being Warhammer 40K somehow.
Well, so on that point, again, because I think there's the thing of yes, I think that there is a need for that. There's an audience for that, and there are stories that have to be told in that world. Um, but at the same time, and I've read plenty of them, and it just sort of makes you down to that point where you're like, "Ow, okay, I need to go take a shower and maybe go walk in the sunshine for a couple of hours to remind myself that the world is okay."
Oh yeah.
Um, Whereas, and I recognize this as myself, while I've written rather dark stuff and some rather, I mean, really dark stuff at the same time, there's always got to be humor there.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be life there. There's got to be hope there. Because even in one of the series I wrote, when the protagonist knows they're facing a death sentence at the end of this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's still that motion of, yeah, but that's tomorrow. That's not today. Um, let's go grab a pint and let's go solve the mystery. Let's go fix the
Right.
problem. Let's go down and do this thing. And what's really fun is that the third book in that series, and at some point I'll write the second trilogy. But in the third book, he's like, shit, I survived that. What do I do now? Right? You've
Yeah.
got that expectation of death. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, I got through that.
You know what? It's funny that you bring that up because it kind of brings me back to Patrick because what's more grimdark than being Irish? Um, but that being said, one thing that Patrick has to deal with constantly in those books is not only have it, people struggle with faith in God. Patrick has something very, very different to deal with. He knows God is there. God is a thing. It like in my universe, God is a thing. Um, Knowing that and knowing that there is this deity and knowing that the creation story is not bullshit and all of these things happened and still seeing how terrible the world can be like you have to find something in yourself every day to get up and just say man this is worth it because I think otherwise and I've talked to priests about this they struggle with this very notion every day of like how difficult the world is and yet having to find a way to get up and be like man this thing's worth it.
Well, and I kind of laugh about that a little bit. So I've been rereading all of the Discworld series in the order
Mm-hmm.
of publication
Ooh.
because I'm reading it from the perspective of watching how his storytelling skills change, how
Mm-hmm.
things have changed. And right now I'm in the middle of Little Gods,
Mm-hmm.
which I'd never read before. It was one of the ones I just never read. And it's interesting because it's that debate between faith and knowing, right?
Yes.
Faith gives a tremendous amount of power.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing is like a burden,
Oh yeah.
right? It's the faith gives that strength and the power in belief of what can be and what you want it to be versus knowing becomes the oh because again, I've written about a lot of gods, and that's
Mm-hmm.
when the anthropologist in me has come out over the years. But and I've had that debate on the page before too, in as well as in white papers and other stuff too. But the difference between faith and all of a sudden, no, I actually know him because we went and had a pint down at the bar. You know,
Yeah.
yesterday, the God I worship, or at this point he's the little God is being carried through the desert. I think that this is one of those things where, and I think this goes back some to readers and writers in the world we're currently in, which is that question of what is faith? What,
Mm-hmm.
what is, what gives us the ability to connect as
Mm-hmm.
humanity?
Right.
And right now, not to go down the long philosophical route, but this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. The other part to me, if you're wanting to build that message, that brand, I don't care what you write,
Mm-hmm.
we want the goal of social media is to create a personal connection with people so that they know who is it they're letting in their head. If you're going to
Mm-hmm.
pick up my books, who's the smart ass you're letting in your head? What are some of my thoughts, my ideas? I don't
Right.
care if you agree with them or not. And I don't necessarily agree with everything I put on the page, but sometimes it's an exploration of an idea, right?
Right.
It's that
But that's
journey.
I have to stop you for a second. That's such an important thing that you just said that I think people don't realize about authors. A lot of the times we're willing to put things on the page that we disagree with
Mm-hmm.
because there's this myth and notion that somehow a book is that author and that's who
Yeah.
that person is. It's like, no, there are things that we put into our work sometimes that we openly disagree with and we put it in there so we can have those disagreements and have those conversations about those disagreements. But sorry, go on. But I thought that was such an important thing to note.
Well, and it's that exploration of the idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, as somebody I'm mentoring right now, and we were having this conversation the other day, I was like, you know, you've hit something when you hit that point of, ooh, I don't know that I want to write that. Do I
Mm-hmm.
delete that? Do I cut that out? That's the stuff that actually has the biggest impact.
Right.
That's the stuff that most often needs to be there, is when
Mm-hmm.
you have that moment of reflection and questioning of, did I go too far? That's often the things that are going to be the thing that has the most reach, the most impact, the most touch. Whether you agree with it or not, it's that point when you cross that whatever that invisible line you've got in your head
Mm-hmm.
of, am I going to do this or not? Am I going to say this or not? Am I going to go that far?
And let me tell you, it's there's nothing harder doing that when you have to write humor too.
Oh yeah. Well,
Like,
my sense of humor is pretty damn gallows to start with. So,
right.
I mean, eh, but that to me is, if you're creating, there is that notion of a little bit of a disconnect, right? You and I both have some friends in the business too that, their social persona is very dark, very this, very
Mm-hmm.
this, very this. You know, they dress the part, they look the part, they're doing the whole grim thing. I'm a horror writer of da 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 da. And
Right.
then you and I both know we'll sit at the bar and it's just absolute ridiculousness. Now,
Right.
there's some of the people we know too that's like, okay, good to see you. I'm going that
Yeah.
way. But I mean, the difference between what's the persona you put out there and the story you tell. Like, I mean, the notion of Cassandra Peterson and Elvira, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just that's a beautiful visage of the vixen and everything else. Now, when you know a bit about her personal life and all the stuff she's gone through and everything else, but still to be able to craft that persona and put that
Right.
out there, and because you've met her too, haven't you?
Elvira?
Yeah.
No.
Really? I
No.
thought you. Well, I've met her at a couple of conventions over the years. It's been a while. Got 'em old.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I mean, when you are able to craft a persona and the things that creates joy, right? You can write very dark things that still touch people in the way they need to be touched, right? When you write psychological horror, you may disturb the hell out of somebody, but at the end of it, hopefully you've made them contemplate something.
Right.
If you're writing snark and some of the stuff that I write, some of it gets very dark, very contemplative, but at the end of it, hopefully you had fun.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully you contemplated something. But I mean, in most of that, it's, did you enjoy the ride? Did you enjoy the
Right.
story? And I think that's the hardest part sometimes is the characters on the page do not always necessarily represent the author, but
Right.
there are parts of everyone's characters that carry either the author or they carry the antithesis of that author. And
Exactly.
the
Yes.
things that they hate the most, the things that they loathe, the things that disturb them, make it to the page as well. And it's not an endorsement, it's an exploration of it to help purge that personal demon.
Right. And especially when you have to talk about serious real world things, when you set your stories in a world that is analogous to the one that we actually live in. Like for example, in the Driver of Serpents, Patrick quits the Vatican because he looks at the Catholic Church and he says, "You're never going to fix yourself after what happened with the child abuse scandal. Like, this is never going to be fixed. There's a line of no return." That is a reflection of what a lot of real Catholics, especially in Ireland, went through, where they looked at this structure and said, "I'm still a Christian, I'm still a Catholic, but I can't be part of this structure anymore." I also know that there's a lot of people who are going to disagree with Patrick and not even read the book because he takes that tact with it.
Right.
But it's one of those things that if you want to write authentic characters, I know we don't like that word, but if you want to write characters that really resonate with people, you have to have that kind of clash in that
Mm-hmm.
conflict of their own personalities meeting other personalities. I think one thing that I see often too much in fiction is that everyone, even if they don't like each other, gets along way too seamlessly today.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is one thing I wish we're always asking, what do you wish you saw more in books? What do you wish you saw less? I wish I saw more real people, and the fact that some people really get along well, some people really hate each other, and then some people are just standing next to each other for 300 pages and not saying a word because they don't have anything to say to each other. Frodo and Legolas don't have to say anything to each other. Those stories aren't dependent on Frodo and Legolas having a conversation, but it's stuff like that.
Well, I'm laughing because the new Cozy Mystery series, um, the protagonist and one of the people she has to deal with on a semi regular basis have a very long standing hatred and loathing of each other.
Right.
And I just finished writing the line of aren't you ever going to bury the hatchet? It's been how many years? And yes, I would love to bury the hatchet right between vertebrates L2 and L3.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, having those two people in a story for 200 to 300 pages
Yeah.
can be a riot and an adventure and fun and wonderful. And two people that can hate each other can still find a way to make a story work together.
Well, I haven't decided yet if he's the villain or not, but probably not because I want to use him for several more stories.
But that's the beauty of the alchemy of what we do. Like, you find that character that you can't kill all of a sudden because you need them for that several stories. People, I wish our readers were more interested in that sometimes.
I had somebody I wrote into a series that the entire reason they were there was to die, and
Right.
I made a decision fairly early on because I knew how much fun I was going to have with them. I wrote the death scene 3 books down. That way it was done.
One last question, and then I will stop asking questions. How easy is it for you to kill a character?
Depends. There have been a few that it was really hard to kill, because and usually it's one that I'm like, I know that when I created them specifically to die this way. And usually those are characters I have way too much fun with leading up to that because I want to make people, of course, feel that hit, right? Same time, it depends. It depends on what it is, right? Because I will also openly say I've had main characters I killed off on the paper just to make myself feel better and then brought them back. Nobody else is ever going to know that they died.
Right.
halfway through a book because they weren't doing what I wanted them to. But no, I mean, it's most of the time it's like, okay, all right, they got to die. Let's keep moving.
Right.
I am facing that in this current cozy mystery series because I have somebody that has to die. They have to die in the first book. They have to die early in it, but I already like them too much. I'm like, oh, this is gonna suck.
Yeah.
But I know how I'm
See,
gonna deal with that.
see, that's it for me. I never go in with the idea that like, oh, I have to spare this person. I'm one of those writers who really follows an outline. I'm not a pantser, and I
Yeah.
stopped pantsing a long time ago. I really stick to an outline. But yeah, sometimes it really sucks to kill certain characters. At the same time, it's one of those things for me where I'm just kind of like, if it serves a story, it serves a story. Which that's another thing too. I think sometimes we kill characters often in a way to be shocking, but it doesn't necessarily serve the story. There's a lot of shows that do that now.
Oh yeah, they kill somebody just for the shock value or because the actor didn't like the new pay scale.
Right, right.
Um, but no, in this particular one, the first draft of this I wrote, I actually killed this character before the story started, and um, and when I did the draft, I went back because I was having to go because I wrote the first draft as a let me figure out the setting, let me figure out the characters, let me figure out this is something I want to write, right? Because a lot of the time if I'm playing with something, I'm trying to figure out what it's going to look like. I will go write novella length to go stretch it out, right? Sometimes it's a
Right.
short story, sometimes it's a couple of paragraphs. This is one I did basically a full novella on it to figure out who they were, the setting, the
Hmm.
tone, and all of this. And I killed this character before they ever hit the page. Because that's what the reason, that's what brings my investigator in was to come for the funeral.
Right.
And sitting down to write the novel now and playing with it, I sat down and I have an outline that goes and picks up. And I went and I said, I'm going to back this up about 5 chapters and see
Hmm.
what happens. And it's fixed a problem in the story I was kept playing with and looking at. So you're going to get to meet this person.
Hmm.
You're going to get to like this person, sort of. But this is somebody you're going to kind of get that sense of very old connection and everything else because it's going to materially change the arc for my two investigators.
Right.
Because you're going to see the impact of that and the impact of how it works. And it's fixed a couple of problems in the story. So sometimes, and I mean, it's entirely possible I may go back and now that I've done that, chop those couple of chapters off and you'll never actually meet them in that space. But generally, I get a little too gleeful when I'm killing people off.
Yeah. Uh, it depends for me. There are some people that I really look forward to ending. There are some people that recently I was working on a novel and I had to care. There's a chapter where everything just goes south and a lot of main characters die. A lot of main characters. And I didn't expect it to hit me as hard as it did when I was killing them. But it's also one of those things where like death is a really interesting integer in fiction and in storytelling where you have to go back and figure out those 5 chapters before the death and try to figure out who this person is beforehand, and readers may never read those,
Mm-hmm.
and that's an interesting tidbit because those will exist someplace somewhere even if it's just in your head, but just knowing that there's this process that you go through, I think is fascinating.
Well, and I mean, there's times that I will write scenes that nobody will ever see where it's happening with characters off screen. You've got to allude to what happened, but you'll write that scene so that you know what happened, right?
Yeah.
And especially if it's going to play out between a couple of people as two different points of view, well, you want to write, here's the actual, this person's point of view was this person's point of view was this. Here's the actual. And I mean, it's fun sometimes to put those, sometimes I've been known to give those out as bonuses, right?
Hmm.
Or it's oh, do you want to know what really happened? Um, or, some of these things that act as that bonus scene, it hits the floor because the story is served. You don't need it, but frequently I will write those, and depending on, because I'm using Scrivener for most of this, I've got a
Right.
different way I annotate those so that they're there, and it's the, no, this is a side scene, that's the throwaway, this is so I know what happened. I plot pretty judiciously, but it's not uncommon for me to weave and waver a little bit because there's those
Right.
times you figure things out. Um, and I mean, if you're doing one book, you can get away with a lot more. If you're doing a series, like
Yeah.
a full defined arc, you better damn well know where you're going to wind up.
Right.
Um, you know,
Absolutely.
well, Jay, as always, a quick chat turned into a couple hours.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I'm always happy to sit down and talk with you. I'm always happy to sit down and come on Continual and talk to everyone for these wonderful panels.
Well, you and I hadn't had a chance to catch up anyway, so I guess everybody gets to see what us catching up looks like.
Yeah. Well, man, this is great. I mean, I think what people would be surprised to hear us talk about off screen is more of what we talk about on screen. Um, I think I really hope people enjoy kind of the AI panel that we just did on genre fiction that we recorded a few hours ago. I really hope there's more of that. I think that we as a community need to have wider discussions about it. And I thought like tonight was a really good thing being able to be a part of that genre fiction and AI panel, of course, on Continual, which will
Yeah,
release here soon.
well, I'm about to bring Creating Prose back out of hiatus with the other stuff I've had going on, and I'm planning on doing a couple of panel shows as a part of that are much more about what's happening in the business, what's happening in the
Right.
industry, getting on some people with some of the different views. Because I mean, again, I'm always tottering on both sides of that line, right?
Right.
Um,
Can I
and with
ask
some
you
of the
one
core
more question? And it's just a yes no question. You can't explore anything about it.
shit, you've met me, right? Have you ever heard me
Yes.
say yes or no? Go ahead.
I'll hold you to it though. Um, let's say you're an author, you have a 3 book deal. HarperCollins comes to you and offers you a 3 book deal with that AI contract they're also offering along with it. Do you sign it?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
And that, folks, is I think where we will probably leave it. But good answer.
Jay, where can everybody find you at?
You can find me at jrequard.com. You can also find me on YouTube at jrequard. You can also search for Pondering the Orb, and you will definitely find me there. Um, Small Talk Sucks is coming sometime this summer. My next book, the Delver of Purgatory, which is the Blessed and Possessed Book 2, is out on May 15th. And thank you, Jim, so much for having me, and thank you for Continual, as always, for having me.
Well, I mean, we've it's been fun tonight. It's always fun catching up with you and fun
Yeah,
chatting anyway.
absolutely.
But yeah, it's been good to just catch up and do this stuff tonight too. So, all right, until next time. This has been Tea Time with.
This has been Tea Time with Jay and Jim.
Oh yeah, this has been bullshitting with Jay and Jim. Yeah, this is what happens. All right, we'll see you soon.
Bye,
Go stack up
everyone.
those CD red files.